Full Circle is brought to you by Goods Candy Shop. We aren't just better, we're goods.
Welcome to Full Circle. I'm Suzanne McAllister. I'm glad you could be with us today. Well, our guest is Greg Garrison. He is known as the voice of the Heartland. His radio show airs weekdays on WIBC from 9 to noon, and he is also a litigation lawyer. It's our pleasure to have Greg Garrison on the program. And I'd also like to add that Greg has gained international notoriety when he successfully prosecuted Mike Tyson on rape charges. He has served on CBS News national legal analyst and has reported on major trials such as O.J. Simpson and Timothy McVeigh. It is great to have you here.
My pleasure, Suzanne. Thanks for inviting me.
Greg, you are known as a very reasonable voice for conservative values. I'm curious, with whom or in what circumstances do you feel that those values and views were shaped?
I think everybody would have to say, except for those that change their minds drastically as they get older, that it's a matter of family and what is around the table in your home when you're growing up. My father was a physician. My mother was one of the, I think, relatively rare women to graduate from college in the 1940s, political science major. And so politics and religion and community were all a part of growing up there. So they were Depression-era babies. They saved twisty ties and rubber bands to this day. She does. He's gone. We lost him 4 years ago. And the things that are in his house, their house today, are things that you can laugh at momentarily or laugh with. But frugality, efficiency, attention to detail, self-reliance, planning for the future, those kinds of things, and individual responsibility, and being ready to take some risks are the kinds of things that I got from them.
And what a wonderful list of things, and what a wonderful way to go into the world on your own. You mentioned that you and your family, and you have a brother who is also your partner in your law firm, that you sat around the table and you learned things. Do you find that perhaps sometimes the kids today, they don't have a table to sit around, let alone have two parents in the house to have the kind of interaction that you had growing up?
And sometimes, a lot of the time, I fear there are two parents, but somebody's got soccer practice and somebody else is in ballet. And I know about that. We raised 7 kids between my wife and I. And when we married, hers were not the youngest, but close. And they were always doing something. But we still had 2, 3, 4 times a week when everybody was at the same place at the same time. You have to do that on purpose. And we'll talk about my children's books later. One of the things that kind of spurred me to write those stories the way that I did was to take kids that had been pulled apart from family by tragedies and see what happened when they got to come back and family got knit back around them again. My 2 youngest are a senior at Ball State and a junior at Wabash now, and they were the babies, and they were surrounded with, my son would say, too many sisters, but he wouldn't trade any of them, and he had 6, so that was the tough one. But wherever they were always surrounded by family, and we ate dinner together, and it was a mob scene. I mean, there were 6 kids in the house. My eldest was already married and gone, living in St. Louis, but 6 kids, a lot of kids around one table, and the table was small and the place was little, and then it grew, and so did we.
Well, you talk about bringing kids back and having that family around them. I know you're very outspoken in your radio show about kids and the destructive messages that they hear. If you had a magic wand, so to speak, how would you change what is going on in our schools, in our society? You know, recently there was the shootings down on the canal in Indianapolis. Things seem out of control in many respects.
They're way out of control. I think the chief of police said in response to, or in the comments that he made after that shooting, had a 14-year-old child shot in that thing, and one of them that was hurt very badly. Matter of fact, I think a policeman saved her life. Leg wounds can be very deadly.
Yeah.
That it's not the city of Indianapolis and the IMPD's responsibility to babysit your kids. And too many people see the malls, the canal, the museums, the area of downtown as a free babysitter. Well, look what happened at Black Expo. Look at all those kids that were unsupervised, many of them of tender years, 10, 11, 12 years old. And you have to ask yourself, how do you do that? Why do you let go of a child that you know full well
And when you talk
can't
about
get there from here?
Exactly. And when you talk about kids being unsupervised, I used to teach in the public schools. Teachers are sometimes handcuffed and the principals, and they're unable to discipline. So here's a child without discipline in the home, without discipline in the schools, and oftentimes they don't have a church family.
You can't discipline or teach an absentee. I think it starts with and ends with the family, which is decimated. Well, at least it is in the urban environment. And that crosses ethnic and socioeconomic levels as well. But in the urban environment, it seems as though more and more that's just cast aside. Starts and ends there. My dad used to say if I ever got in trouble at school and got paddled by a teacher, I'd get ready because I'm going to get it again when I get home. And I never got one at school, and that was why, because I figured his would be worse than the first one was. But we need to be aware that once we separate behavior from consequence, which we can do by default as well as doing it on purpose, then what do you expect out of a kid? I mean, they're going to go primal on you. They're going to do, you watch them.
Sure. So we need to step up as adults.
And the schools need to do, well, Governor Daniels has done things to help that by giving a bit of protection to the teachers. You know, the time is gone when a teacher can reach around and jerk some kid by the knot in his tie and make him sit down. And when I was a student teacher, and when I was a student, that happened. And believe me, everybody in the room got the point.
And kids don't have ties these days. We need to take a short break. Maybe that's the problem. We'll just give kids ties. Don't go away. We're back with more after this. Welcome back to Full Circle. If you've just now joined us, I'm talking with Greg Garrison. I'm sure you're familiar with the fact that he is a talk show host on WIBC, and he's also a litigation attorney, but you may not know that he is the author of a children's book called Montana Bound. So why did you write this book, Greg?
That's a long story, but I'll try to keep it inside the blocks here. When I was a kid, my mother read a book to me called The Rising Arrow. And it was a story written by a woman whose name was Hughie, Hughie, Hughie Call, C-A-L-L. And she was a Montana gal who wrote a story about two boys who lost their dad in Korea. Think about how long ago this was.
Sure,
This is 1950,
but it's still relevant at the time,
1954,
yeah.
55. And so the story was they go out to visit their uncle on a sheep ranch for the summer. And they have grand experiences and great adventures. I loved that story. I was in the early to mid grades, and my mom read it to me. And I saved it forever, and now I've lost it, and it makes me sick, although I found out I can still find a copy of it on the internet, so I may buy a new one just to have it. We went through a period when my youngest two, that we mentioned earlier, they were the babies. We sang songs every night before bed. And I began to lose my choir because a lot of kids were graduating and going off to school. And so that kind of transformed itself into storytelling. And I pulled on the inspirations and experiences of my own childhood to include The Rising Arrow. And I began to tell stories to Ashley and Clint. And the two lead characters were Ashley and Clint. So they got to, and
Well, they must love that.
Oh, they were crazy about it. And we always left them hanging on a cliff someplace at the end of the night, and they'd groan and moan. And the older kids got to peeking in and listen to them because they liked them pretty well. And finally somebody said, Dad, you got to write those down. Well, he was 4 and she was 5. He's 21 and she's going to be 23 in June. It took me a while.
So what do they think when they read the book? Is it very similar to the stories that you used to tell?
The two that I told them to have spent less time paying attention to it, college will do that to you. The older ones that heard some of them like them just fine. And my wife has kibitzed on all the stuff, and she was oftentimes in the room when we told them. So I put those down there for a number of reasons, to commemorate their childhood a little bit, to maybe draw forward, as we were talking about before, some of the things of my own history and my family life that I thought were salient and important, and I wanted to preserve those. And because I thought that there's 2 stories in that book. There are 2 novels that are about 90 pages apiece. Mm-hmm. They are easy for a kid 4th grade up to read for themselves. And some younger kids have said that they like them themselves and will read them, but grandparents, mom and dad, aunts and uncles, when you get back to 1st grade. So this is a book that I think will reach from 1st grade to about 8th as a book that they can read. I wrote it in such a way that the homeschoolers could use it, the grammar's correct, the punctuation's right, the verb tense agreement, and those kind of things are okay, so that we don't lose anything in that regard. And I wanted to memorialize what I'd done, write a couple of stories that were strong on family, that were exciting, that had a good guy and a bad guy, or some good guys and some bad guys, and so we could have
resolution of
something where good things happened, and again to build a family where one was broken, and we've done, those 2 have done pretty well. I've had no trouble selling them, and Brinkman Press here in Indianapolis printed them for me, and they're fulfilling the orders for us.
And the book is called Montana Bound. You can go to GregGarrison.com and order the book. I highly recommend it. As Greg said, it has some great stories and meaning in terms of things that can be very helpful for your family as well. Congressman Pence has also endorsed it, as we see on the back. But Montana Bound, there's a theme going on here. There's a horse here. I see you have your cowboy boots on. You look very professional, and then I notice you have the cowboy boots. Horses have been a big part of your life.
Ever since I was a kid, actually, at least since college, early college. I wanted them before that, but there wasn't any place to keep them. Started riding out west. Matter of fact, my first real experiences with horses of any significance was in the Bighorn Mountains of eastern Wyoming and Montana.
You know, we've been talking a lot about families and the breakdown of some parts of our society, and I find that many kids are not exposed to just the great outdoors. Do you feel that perhaps by getting kids around horses or other animals can help them reconnect with themselves and our Lord?
You know, there are a number of different kinds of ministries to kids that include horses. Of course, kids that are disabled, kids that have got learning disabilities, Down syndrome kids. There have been remarkable strides made with their communication skills through the horse. Kids that have been injured and have a hard time getting motor skills back from spinal injuries and the like. All kinds of things, and bringing kids out from the city, out from the inner city. Be amazed how fast a 12 or 14-year-old, a 10 or a 12-year-old can accumulate writing skills when all they have known in their whole lives was concrete and gravel. It's remarkable.
A big, remarkable change. Well, the book is called Montana Bound. You can go to GregGarrison.com and get your own copy of the book. We'll be back with more after this. Well, if you've just now joined us, I'm continuing a conversation with Greg Garrison. Greg, I would be remiss if I don't talk about politics while you're here. We're almost out of time.
Stock and trade.
I know, stock and trade. So what was it about politics that interested you in the first place?
It went dormant for a while. As I said, we were a very political family growing up, and that was the topic of conversation every night. My dad was a member of the evil John Birch Society at one point way back in the early 60s. And always of conservative mind and self-reliant, as doctors in those days were so much. And it kind of went to sleep as I was raising kids and paying attention to my profession and trying to make a living. And it was coming back in me anyway when I was invited to try my hand at radio. Following the O.J. Simpson case, well, of course, we prosecuted Tyson.
Sure.
And that sort of established me in a way as the prosecution side of a conversation that would come up on something like O.J. Simpson. And I ended up working for CBS News for 6 years. And I started in 1997 or so, doing 2 hours of night radio every night, Monday through Friday. Mr. Pence decided to run for Congress. I took his show over and went to 9 till noon in 2000, and I've been on the air for 14, 15 years now. And that, of course, once you're there, it's got you.
Absolutely, and people love to tune in and hear your opinions, but also they like to hear the differing views as well, and you welcome those, don't you?
They go to the top of the list. They don't believe that, but they do. And the more whacked out thing is, the more likely they are to go first.
But again, you're back to that voice of reason. At least that's my impression when you talk with some folks that may not have the same viewpoint as you do.
The accusation used to be that I was too severe on them. So what I try to do now is the more they appear to be diametrically opposed to me, the more I try to let them have all the line they need until they're done. And we have some pretty lively conversations, and those spawn phone calls like you wouldn't believe. Whoever agrees or doesn't agree, then they get in the mix, and it's a lot of fun. I mean, you get to play center field after a while, a little bit, just kind of keeping it all rolling.
Yeah. Now, you recently went to Washington, D.C. for a memorial service for Andrew Breitbart. Tell me a little bit about that loss that we have in terms of conservative voice.
Andrew was not just a conservative voice, he was a conservative warrior. Died at 43. Of a heart problem, and left 4 kids behind, and that's part of the tragedy, and it's painful that it's there. But conservatism and America lost a voice when he passed on that is very unusual. He would go toward people that hated their country or had some beef with it, the Occupy type folks, and say, okay, what is that sign up there says Glenn Beck lies. Name me a lie. And he pressed the guy. Of course, he couldn't. You know, somebody paid him to come and gave him a sign to hold, and he didn't even know what the thing said. But Andrew would do that over and over again, and he was exuberant and full of life. He believed in limited government and low taxes and individual responsibility and care and concern for each other and sovereign borders and those things that are important to conservatives. But he had this pizzazz to go with it. He was young, and he appealed so much to a younger audience as well. And he led the way into the business that we must not permit our country to go the way of excuse-making, of entitlements, and of a sort of a moral and economic bankruptcy that I think we're on the verge of these days.
Well, I think that's a good place to end. Unfortunately, we are out of time. When I hear that description, it also reminds me of you. And I want to thank you for being our guest on Full Circle.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Suzanne.
Thanks. We're back with our musical showcase after this.
Stay tuned. Musical Showcase is coming up next. And now, here's our musical showcase.
Thanks for joining us today for another Full Circle. Remember to go to greggarrison.com for your copy of his book, Montana Bound. Now here's Autumn Latendre with Daddy Loves You.
Married just 4 weeks, it was time to say goodbye. Camp Lejeune, lots of buses, a sea bag by his side. I placed my head on his shoulder and sang my battle cry. I know there's a leather neck inside, waiting for a fight. And if the situation arises, well, I guess it'd be alright to show them the red, white, and blue, and a Marine thing or two. And never forget, I love you. 7 months went by, it was time for his return. So I spray painted a flat sheet, hung it on Highway 24. There must have been more than 100 billowing in the display for all of our men. And then right in front of me, my United States Marine, proud to have defended a land where we're free. And I thought, God, He takes my breath. Quickly embraced His chest and cried, hold me, hold me. We drove home smiling, holding hands, reminding how much we missed and longed for that kiss. We were in love. Home just 5 months. It was time to say goodbye, but this time will be different, with a baby inside. He placed his hands on my stomach and sang his battle cry. My little leather neck inside, don't put up a fight. And when the situation arises, come out with all your might, 'cause you are the red, white, and blue, and a Marine thing or two. And never forget, Daddy loves you. My little baby boy by my side, we're gonna be just fine. Your daddy loves this country.
See, be, care, share, gifts and more. Nature Explore. For the children in your life, visit Nature Explore at arborday.org.